Welcome back. I'm playing Warhammer 40,000 Battlesector, and today I'm going to go over my recommended changes for the Tau. If you've been watching my videos for quite some time, you probably have heard many of these recommendations before. If you have other thoughts, please comment below on this video, and that way we can have kind of all of our thoughts for each faction consolidated into one area. The reason I'm going back to remake some of these videos is when in the past I've just kind of made big summary videos of my recommended changes for units and factions, but I've had them all kind of grouped together. And some of the people that are newer to the channel that are asking me for my thoughts, and I point them towards those videos, they tend to get a little bit frustrated because they're like, can you just make it for each faction? That way I can watch it specifically for that. And so given that I've received several of those requests, and then as I've been going back through watching the unit review guides, adding some time codes, that's kind of refreshed my memory on different units, different loadouts, and made me kind of change my opinion, especially with some of the patches that have been brought out since the game was originally released, and that's kind of made me change some thoughts on some things here. Now, I will disclose, and I just want to inform people that Slytherin, the maker of this game, does have a Discord channel, and they say the best way for them to know about bugs or to give suggestions for changes would be to post stuff on their channel. So I certainly encourage people to do that if you feel strongly. I just haven't found that they've been super receptive. So I'll put everything together in one video here, and maybe if somebody from there sees this video and wants to give some thoughts and be able to see what our community has to say for recommended changes just to consolidate in one spot, then this would make it easier for them to see as well. Now, I doubt that's going to happen, but that was also one of the arguments that some of the subscribers are making for me to be willing to remake some of these videos here. Now, if you're enjoying these videos, please give my channel a like and subscribe to encourage me to post more content for you. And I always want to disclose on these videos that I don't recommend that they make every one of these changes, because I think that's going to make things too unbalanced, either too many nerfs or too many buffs for some of these units. But I like to try to get everything to be a little more viable to make it a better option. Now, they did really rework a lot of the Tau units, and I think in a lot of ways a lot of their changes worked pretty well, but there's definitely a few units that it feels like they really missed the mark, and so I want to give my thoughts on this. Now, I know there's several very fervent Tau followers out there, and they get super pissed off when I make these videos because I feel like I'm just always shit-kicking the Tau. But I do feel like they're a very good faction, and I do think there needs to be some minor changes to how they work out here to make things be a little more balanced and a little more dynamic. So with that, the first unit that I think needs to get a slight tweaking is the commander. Now, in full transparency, I'm not sure the best way to do this. I think the universal thing for anybody that has options for a drone companion is I think this needs to be redone. I think the default should be that you get a gun drone. If you want to spend 5 or 10 extra, then you should get a marker drone, and then for 15 extra you should get the shield drone. But there's nobody in the world that's gonna give up a 15% damage reduction that's for free to spend 10 points to get a pulse carbine attack that has 12 attacks, 2 to 3 damage, 2 armor piercing. I mean, you would have to be brain dead to use some of these other options when you have this for free. This is just so good of an ability that you're getting for free. It just doesn't make sense that you would get rid of that. So I'd actually like to see it. So even if you do like 0, 5, 10, because I feel like the other thing that I don't really like about the Tau is I feel like their drones are just too expensive, and so I do think it needs to be decreased here because people frequently will not be changing out the drone type. So I think if you just redid the cost allocations and the order here, I think that would make it much better. Obviously the same thing would be going for the stealth battlesuit, and then I think the significant reduced cost for the marker drone or the marker lights for these drones would be very beneficial as well. So I'd just like to see that be changed on this. Now, the part I'm not totally sure what the best way to do this is nobody plays with the Cold Star, okay? Everybody just goes with the Enforcer armor because it's so good. You get it for free. You get an additional armor, so it makes it even harder for them to kill your commander and do damage, especially when you have that 15% damage mitigation. And then for the most part, you get this, you know, weaker burst cannon, which is fine. But that armor and then having the ranged accuracy really doesn't matter, because most people are going to be jumping around and using them to flame units, and so you get 100% accuracy with that flamer anyways. So what does it matter for you to have this ranged accuracy? So what I think they should actually do is have the default be the Cold Star minus the high burst cannon, and then you can have them just have the increased ranged accuracy. Now, I don't know if you necessarily want to keep it at a cost of 20. You probably do if you're going to give the higher outburst cannon and the +1 armor. I think that's probably a fair requisition cost. Now, if you're going to do that, then the next question is do you just reduce that ranged accuracy penalty when you're using your jetpack? Because then it's going to feel a little bit bad and a little counterintuitive, but then you're not always going to be using your jetpack, right? So you're going to be having, you know, every 2 turns you'll be using that potentially. So then when you'd be attacking and you'd still have the high output burst cannon be doing more damage and shooting from range, and then using the flamer intermittently. So I'm not sure quite the best way on the specifics to do that, but I do think you need to kind of switch the order here, because nobody is using this Cold Star. I mean, I get what they're going for. They're like, oh, you can jump around and then you can shoot with this high output burst cannon, and it actually is a pretty decent weapon, but for the most part you're going to kill way more just using your flamer, especially if you're buffing them up with the cadre, getting them additional shots and things like that. So it was a good idea, but for most multiplayer matches, everybody's just going with the 1 armor, and so I just like to see that rearranged a little bit here and kind of swapped a little bit. And again, I'm not quite sure the best way to handle the whole jet boost situation, but I do think I would kind of rearrange this here, because it just, you know, the +1 armor is just so much better than the other variant here. Now, if you guys have other thoughts on kind of how they could adjust this a little bit, please let me know, because like I said, I'm not 100% sure the best way to do this. I try not to change too many things here, but I definitely think this needs to be rearranged, because, you know, spending 20 points on the Cold Star, just nobody is doing it, so why even bother? Now, I would say the unit they really screwed up is the Ethereal. When he was first released, he was crazy broken. I mean, this is why people hated the Tau when they came out, unless they were main players for it. I mean, in fact, I felt so guilty doing a tournament with them that I had to start adding another faction to the tournament that I was using the Tau on, because I was just curb stopping people so badly. And in fact, if you've been watching my videos, you know the last tournament I participated in, I used the Adeptus Sororitas to prove that I could just easily get to the #1 ranking just using that faction alone, because it was so overpowered. And when the Tower first released, I could have easily done that with the Tau as well, but it just felt like it was almost like cheating. So the way they changed this just feels really bad. They made him a better melee combatant, fine, I guess that's reasonable. But what they ended up doing is they make the Sense of Stone now take 2 action points, but I guess that makes sense because it goes within 2 tiles. It gives you 20% bonus HP. It only lasts for 1 turn. And then they turn Zypher's Grace into being 1 tile with 10 evasion. So what I would think would be a better option would be to drop this down to plus 10%. You can keep it at 2 tiles. You make it so it only has a 1-turn duration and a 3-turn cooldown. I think that's reasonable. And then I think what I would do is I would just keep this the way it is and have plus 10 evasion, 1 unit within, or units within 1 tile, cooldown of 2 turns. That seems reasonable. What I'm not entirely sure about, and I'd be curious to know what your guys' thoughts are, but if you're going to have that be an ability, do they need to knock 5 points off of the evasion for the Pathfinders? Because that's going to be putting them all up to 25. Do you think that's too high if they do this and that might be swinging things the other way? I think it's probably fine to keep it the way it is, because with your Pathfinders here, chances are you're going to be using the ion rifles and they may be damaging themselves with the overcharge anyways. And so giving them a little bit of evasion, especially if they're self-mutilating themselves with the overcharge ability and can easily be killed once they're damaged, I think that's probably going to be reasonable. But that would be my only concern. I don't necessarily have a problem with somebody being able to double stack the buffs on one turn. What was really frustrating though is people were in perpetuity using these stacks. Now my only concern would be is if we drop it down to one action point, I think that's going to start bringing back the double ethereal builds, which is what people would do before, and then effectively every turn, oh well, for 2 turns in a row they're going to get +2 +10 bonus HP. Now, I think if you keep it at 10 and it's just lasting for 1 turn, I still think that's probably going to be okay. But maybe if you guys think that's going to be too overpowered, maybe do a slight increase to the cost of the Ethereal to kind of punish people a little bit for doing the double Ethereal build. Not really punishing, but to make it so it's not so overpowered. I'd be very curious to know what your guys' thoughts are on that. I don't think I would be taking HP away. I think it's fine that they made him a little bit better combatant, because once these things are on cooldown, there's not a whole lot for him to do. And then you would still be trying to snipe them out and everything like that. But I think that's what I would like to see. You know, it feels bad to have, you know, the 2-8. I mean, yes, this is very good. It'll help you for that 1 turn. But then you're kind of in this weird situation where you're kind of off balance, because then it's like, okay, I want to buff everybody, but now I still got to get kind of closer to the next turn if I want to put down the Grace ability, and then I got to move you out of here. It just doesn't feel like the Ethereal's in a good spot. Now, if you guys have better thoughts on kind of how to balance him a little bit better, I would definitely like to hear it. Perhaps, you know, you could do, you know, 15 health and then make it be within 1 tile. If you think that the 2 tiles would be too powerful, if you're going to drop it down to 1 action point. But it feels like the Tau have been beaten back kind of so much that they're actually starting to struggle a little bit more on some matchups. So I feel like the pendulum's kind of swung too far the other way for the Tau, especially with some of the changes that I'm going to recommend on some of these units. They are some nerfs to other units. So maybe giving them, bringing back the Ethereal a little bit to help buff it, to help stabilize the army roster might be better. But that's kind of what I've been toying around with my thoughts on this unit here. But again, I would be curious, again, for those of you that play Tau as mains, to see what your thoughts are. But with how these changes have happened now, I'll occasionally see somebody bring an Ethereal just to make them the commander and then keep them way in the back of the map, and rarely ever use them for anything else other than the strategic command points. But that just feels bad, because he went from being a must take to a rarely take, and so he definitely got nerfed into the ground. So I'd like to see him be a little more balanced to be a much viable option. Now, again, we already talked about my recommendations for the drone. The other thing I'd like to see changed is I don't really like how the camouflage system works currently. I feel like being invisible for 5 turns and having a 5-turn cooldown, I just feel like that isn't a very fun mechanic. You activate it on the 2nd turn, and then effectively you could be stealth for half the match, and even greater than half a match, assuming you're playing an 8-turn match, which most people are going to be doing. So I think what I would like to see is maybe the stealth function lasts for 2 to 3 turns and then has +1 turn cooldown, so you couldn't stealth back to back. And that way you have to be a little more strategic on when you're activating your cloaking ability, instead of just, you know, on the very first turn using your jump pack, getting into 1 square away from your action point, activating your cloaking field, and then just running around the map for 3 or 4 turns. I feel like that's kind of a poor, boring play style. So I kind of like it to be a little more strategic, and I think by decreasing the duration of the camouflage field would be the best. Now, I still think it's perfectly reasonable that if somebody runs into you when you're camouflaged, you get an automatic overwatch attack, and that you stay camouflaged unless you take damage. I like all those things, and I also like the fact that you will become unstealth if you capture a strategic point while you're stealth, but you could capture it, and then if you still have an action point left, then you could make your stealth on that point. I think all those other mechanics they've really done a nice job with, but I definitely don't like the duration, and that would be the same situation with the Ghostkeel here. Now, the next unit I would like to see get a little bit of a rework is the Riptide. Now, I don't think anybody was really expecting them to make the changes that they did. Effectively, they gave him 5 movements, so now he has some of the most movement out of any unit type, and he just has it all the time, so it's like he's the equivalent of a land speeder. I feel like that's kind of a weird decision that they made. So what I would instead like to see is that he goes back to 4 movement, and instead he has this massive jet pack on his back here. So why not give him the jump pack ability? You know, give him +2 movement or something like that, and let him jump around. I don't think you necessarily... maybe you could give him a mild accuracy penalty since he's this massive mech suit jumping around, but even if you didn't, he doesn't necessarily need to have a penalty. You let me know what your guys' thoughts are. Like I said, I'm not sure how this would work with balancing, but I think that would make for a much more enjoyable dynamic unit here, because then you could, you know, jump them into critical areas, snipe out enemy leaders. You know, you get to see more dynamic gameplay with these guys instead of literally like, oh, I'm going to pop out behind cover, I'm going to shoot, oh, I'm going to run back to cover now because I have 5 movement. It just doesn't feel like he's quite where they need to be. And then if people are using him, they're always going to use the heavy burst cannon, and that's because this freaking ion accelerator sucks ass. So this needs to be reworked. So I have a couple of thoughts on it. The first one is the range needs to be reworked on this weapon here. The minimum range is way too high. This is effectively how the Vanquisher tanks and things were when they were first released as well, and everybody hates this. You know, most of the maps are not big open maps. There's things in the way, so you need to reduce that minimum range. I mean, drop it down to 2, you know, so then people can use this much easier. And then maybe add a little bit of splash damage onto the ion accelerator. So this is meant to be like your anti-medium to heavy unit killer, whereas your burst cannon is your all-rounder attacker, because you can obviously really kill infantry and can even damage vehicles pretty decently. But I think you need to make this be a much more interesting weapon here. And I think the biggest thing that would actually make it a much better choice is if you just alter those range. And you really got to take away that 5 minimum range, because it just makes this a completely impossible weapon to use on a lot of matchups that have closed areas, because you just can't line up a shot because 5 minimum range is just too much. You know, again, you realize that that was a mistake to do on the Vanquisher cannon for the Astra Militarum. It's a mistake to do on the Riptide too, and I think that should be fixed and reduced and treated just like you would the Vanquisher cannon. Now, I don't know, I still think that having an optimal range of 5 feels a little bit weird, but I think that's because the heavy burst cannon has an optimal range of 4. So what do you guys think about having the heavy burst cannon maybe go to an optimal range of 3 instead, and then bring the ion accelerator optimal range to 5, or maybe just make it an optimal range of 5 and then keep the heavy burst cannon the way it is? I mean, honestly, I kind of like the heavy burst cannon the way it is, so I don't know if it necessarily has to be changed. But maybe you're trying to make an argument that if you're trying to make this your, you know, vehicle killer, more armor piercing, maybe you need to have more of a range differentiation. But I don't think that's necessarily true. Or you could just keep it at an optimal range of 6 and you just make this be your long range variant attacker. And then but you need to reduce that minimum range cutoff, because again, at range of 5, people just can't get attacks off. And then I think just keeping the plasma rifles at a cooldown to 1 is fine, because this is a very expensive unit. It's probably the most expensive unit on the Tau roster. So I think with those kind of tweaks here, that would make this a much more viable option. We talked about the Ghostkeel here. I think it's fine that he has the little power fist attack here. I think that's pretty reasonable. I don't know if he necessarily needs to have splash ×2, because if he's fighting low tier infantry, he has a flamer attack. So, and it kind of feels weird that he has actually a pretty good melee attack. So perhaps dropping down the splash here and kind of nerfing his melee would be a better option, because the fact that he does 48 to 60 damage in melee means he's actually doing more damage than some of the melee heroes that are meant to be in melee. So it just feels kind of weird that the Tau can out melee other melee factions with a few units. But you know, again, if you guys think that I'm nerfing it too much, you know, voice your opinions on this. But I did kind of think that that was kind of weird that he would get such a, you know, a splash ×2 situation when he's just punching somebody. But again, let me know if you guys think that's swinging too far in one direction here. Now, I know this is a very unpopular opinion as well, but I think there needs to be differentiation between the Broadside's railgun and the Hammerhead's railgun. Especially because, you know, it's such an expensive unit, and these guys have lots of other weapons. You know, it has a very powerful melee attack. It's got the smart missile system, which is a free 100% accuracy attack every 3 turns, and then it has the seeker missile. So it feels really weird that you would select the Hammerhead over the Broadside, especially because they both have these range situations here. Now, again, I would like to see the minimum range be changed a little bit. Now, it doesn't necessarily have to drop to 2, because just looking at the angle here, you know, this guy's not going to be able to shoot targets that are so close, so you can make an argument, okay, we don't want it to be too short, but 5 definitely feels a little bit overwhelming here. So again, I think having that minimum range drop down to maybe 3 would be a much better option, because this is a hover unit. So unlike the other units where you're having no hover ability and there's slight obstacles in your terrain that you can't overcome, the hover mechanic here will allow you to overcome that difficult terrain and allow you to get better attacks. And so again, I know people don't like when I say this, but I would like to see maybe the heavy rail rifle have a maximum range of 10, and then for the Hammerhead variant, which has the larger railgun, then you make that out to a range of 12, and that way you can help with the differentiation between the two. Because otherwise, you know, it has the same base accuracy, the same accuracy fall off. So I just feel like the Hammerhead variant here, because you're spending more money on this unit, it should have a better railgun. So you know, even maybe making the accuracy fall off be slightly less, so then you're just giving an overall net buff for units to be bringing out the Hammerhead with the railgun, because I rarely see this unit used. And the other thing I'd like to see is the pulse carbine attack here. I think that should have a 1-turn cooldown for the Hammerhead, and that way you can be spamming it every turn, because this is a unit that's costing 310 points to bring out on the field. You know, you can definitely snipe some very important characters, high value characters, especially if you give the cadres 100% chance to hit with this. This can be an absolute nightmare for killing whatever's in your way. But again, I rarely see it used just because it's so expensive, and you don't quite get the bang for your buck on most matchups, because again, most matches don't have big open areas where you can just sit back and shoot across the map and kill units. So I think making those changes would make it better. The other thing I'd like to see change is, again, the ion cannon, just like how I think it should. The ion accelerator here for the Riptide should get some splash. I think the ion cannon should get some splash too. You shouldn't have to use your overcharge ability to get some splash damage. So I think even just adding like a ×1 or maybe a ×2 splash, I'm not sure the best amount for it to happen, but to make this kind of your anti-infantry killer that you can make really powerful with your overcharge ability, and this being your assassination weapon here against a single target unit heavy armored target. I think adding a little splash here would make this unit become much more viable, and you'd see a lot more play with it, because now it's a little bit frustrating because it's like, okay, I gotta buff you with the cadre, I gotta give you a 100% chance to hit, then I'm gonna overcharge, that'll give me splash, and then that will allow me to squad wipe some infantry that are, you know, important. Whereas if you just add some splash to begin with, I think this will be a very good unit, and it'll actually be able to squad wipe people more regularly, creating a more interesting dynamic. And then again, this 5 minimum range is too much. You know, dropping it down to 3 would be much more balanced with the way the game mechanics have been changing, and would make it much more competitive with other factions here. The Broadside, I otherwise like everything about it. Again, I think it's very strange that the Broadside has such a powerful melee attack. I would like to actually see that nerfed a little bit, because the fact that he can out-damage a lot of melee people that are attacking him just feels kind of weird. I mean, he's effectively stomping on something, so he's practically a better melee fighter than a bloodthirster, a blood grinder of Khorne. It just feels weird. So, you know, I think I'm going to make a video with the Chaos Demons talking about how I think they need to be increased with their damage. Well, this one seems like it's a little bit too overtuned, so I'd like to actually see the crushing bulk here be reduced with his melee counter. Now, I appreciate that these are the only 2 units in the Tau Force that have melee, but again, they're meant to be a pure ranged faction here. So the fact that this guy can sit there and step on you, but the Riptide that's probably 20 feet taller than he is can't, it just feels like kind of a stupid situation here. So I would bring that down, and you know, I think you could even consider maybe giving the Riptide a crush attack too. But again, if you're going to add it to other units, then you need to reduce the damage that it would be doing. The next unit would be the Piranha here. My only thought is, again, I would kind of like to see the Pulse Carbine turned down to a 1-turn cooldown. I think at a cost of 100, that might be too overtuned. So, you know, I think maybe keeping it the way it is fine, but if you're gonna decrease the cooldown to your Pulse Carbine to be a free attack every turn, then I think you probably need to increase the cost by 5 or 10 points. So either keep it the way it is, or if you're gonna have to be lazy with your coding, if you're going to change the Pulse Carbine to be a 1-turn cooldown, then just slightly increase the cost a little bit here to reflect that you're getting that extra attack. You know, since we were talking about drones and things like that, being the gun drone being your basic free attack, then I don't think it's unreasonable that it just, you know, add 5-10 cost and then it'll be a wash. But again, let me know what your guys' thoughts are there. Now, the tactical drones, again, I've already voiced my opinion that I think you need to decrease the cost of the marker drone upgrade here, 20 points to bring this up to 60. That's ridiculous. Nobody in their right mind is going to pay 60 requisition for 4 units that have 35 health each with 3 armor that can easily be killed by anything. So I would just like to see that be reduced a little bit here. And then the other thing I would like to see change is, while people are probably pulling their hair out like, dang it, Classy, you're just sitting here nerfing the frickin' Tau into oblivion. Well, that's because what I think should happen here is the Tau are still a little bit difficult to get full momentum. So with their faction trait, you're getting momentum when your units are being squad wiped. What I would like to see in exchange for all these nerfs that I'm recommending is that tactical drones, when they have a squad wipe, they actually give you that momentum gains as well. That way you can increase the chance of your other units being able to empower and surge and get bonus attacks and things like that. Because my understanding is they do have a pretty significant affinity with their drones, and they have quite an emotional attachment. So I think given that faction trait, you should be getting some momentum when you're squad wiping the drones too. And that would lead to some interesting dynamic play where people may want to do tactical drone armies just to stack up momentum for their higher tier units. And then they could bring out some Ethereals and do massive buffs to the tactical drones, because a whole army of tactical drones here with their attacks, they can actually do surprising damage to low armored units like the Forces of Chaos or even some orcs. They can be a real nuisance, even against a Tyranid Swarm faction. So making that to be a more viable option, I think, would be very beneficial, because how the Tau are currently balanced is they will be completely overwhelmed by the Tyranid Swarm builds, and it's very difficult for them to counteract that build. So by increasing the viability of the tactical drones and then the momentum gains that that can give you to your other units, I think that would help balance that option to be much more effective. And it would probably be more in line with, you know, something like the Scarabs that are costing, you know, 30 points, and then have, you know, a hover mechanic like these guys do, but then they also have 10 models. I think that would just make it much better. Your other option is that you could maybe reduce the cost down to 35, and that would be, you know, a pretty significant buff to the Forces of Chaos, because now for a minor cost, you're now getting another set of marker lights that you can put on your more elite units, so you can get your 100% chance to hit with your seeker missiles and do some other interesting play. I think that's what I would recommend for that situation. You know, the Breachers, I still think they are a little bit overtuned, but with all the other changes that have already been recommended, I don't think you could make any changes to these guys. I think that would be too much of a nerf if you're gonna do some of these other things here, so I would just leave them alone. And then I think the Pathfinders and the Warrior Strike teams are pretty reasonable. The only other thing I was thinking is, do you guys think the 40% chance for 40 damage to the Pathfinders is too much now that the Ethereals? I think it, well, I'll give my answer to this question. I think 40% chance, 40 damage with how badly they nerfed the Ethereals is too far of a nerf, because now you can only, if you get a bad roll where it hurts 4 of your units, and you can't overcharge anything, and then with so much of the other ranged units doing so much increased damage with the power creep in this game, then that effectively means a model will have 10 health here and they can easily be killed. So I would like to see that damage maybe be either the percentage reduced to like 30%, or to see the damage that's dealt on the overcharge maybe being cut down to 30. Maybe you can make an argument for even 20, but I think that would be too much, because then you can use 2 overcharges without having any concerns of wiping any units. And I think that's part of the game mechanic that's kind of fun, is you're trying to balance, okay, what's the RNG that I'm going to take the damage? And then, okay, I've taken the damage, what are the chances that that same unit's gonna get damaged again, in which case he's gonna die? So I think if you keep it at 30, they should at least have enough HP to survive 1, and then if you use the Ethereal to try to bring their HP up, they would potentially be able to tank a second one too with that temporary HP. So I think that would just lead to some dynamic plays. So that's what I'd like to see, is somehow between the buff of the Ethereal and the damage that the overcharge happens, that would allow you to potentially tank 2 overcharge hits. But that would be my kind of ideal situation here to help. And then my only other thought is the tier 1 strategic command point ability. It requires that you drop 2 of the missiles, seeker missiles. But the problem is, there's times where you can kill an enemy commander, but he's all by himself, and so you have to have another unit in some sort of proximity to drop that second missile. So do you guys think it would be, so I think there's 2 solutions. Is one, you just create a way within the system where you can just launch the attack with just a single missile strike, and then it'll let you do that to assassinate the unit that you want. The second option is you just double the range, that it'll allow you to select a second unit, because right now it's programmed the same way, I suspect, as the Exorcist and some of those other units that have to attack units that are somewhat close by, and so it can be hard to select a second target. The other option is that you just allow them to select 2 targets anywhere on the map, but then you might need to nerf the damage a little bit, because I think being able to select 2 of those seeker missiles anywhere on the map is going to be too powerful for assassinating
enemy leaders. The other option is you just restrict the range more and make it have to be closer to your HQ commander, but then it can be in any direction. So I think any of those options would be viable, but the way it is now, it's extremely frustrating, and I've had several very close matches where it's like, I can kill this unit right here, but I can't actually activate my ability because I don't have a target for that second missile, and it won't let me activate it consistently with just a single missile strike here. So that would be my only other thought to make this a little more balanced. So with that, I'm going to sign off for the day. Like I said, if you guys have other opinions on changes you'd like to see made to the Tau forces to make them a little more well-rounded, please comment below. I think with these changes, pretty much everything should be a viable unit then, and it may lead to some more versatility in the gameplay. But I definitely think some things need to be a little bit tweaked here just to make it a little bit better and more balanced, because overall I really like the changes they made with the major Tau patch, but there's a few things that I think could have been done a little bit better, and they really shit the bed on the Ethereal. So that unit for sure has to be changed so he can at least become a reasonable choice again, because right now I don't see like anybody using that regularly. So again, and just again, because I can already see the comments on this video saying if they made all these changes, you're going to make the Tau suck. It's like, I'm not suggesting they should make every one of these changes. I'm just giving suggestions on some potential changes. They don't have to choose them all. It's just these are different ideas that I had to just add a little bit more versatility into the gameplay. So thanks for watching. I hope you're enjoying these videos. If you are, please give my channel a like and subscribe to encourage me to post more content for you. Have a great day.